Good morning, everyone. On behalf of entire management committee of INFA, I extend a very warm welcome to each and every participant here. On the occasion of World Zoonosis Day, INFA Managing Committee has organized this webinar. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable time for this webinar. In this webinar, we have distinguished speakers who have prepared presentations and deliberations for this interaction. The webinar duration would be 90 minutes, so we'll try to close at 12:30. Initial 1 hour, our invited speakers will share their thoughts, views with all of us. And 30 minutes we have kept for interaction for Q&A. And first and foremost, let me introduce all the invited speakers and my colleagues on this call. Mr. Vijay Tang, President INFA, will be the addressing. Then we have keynote address from Professor Dr. Ajit Ranade, Dean, Mumbai Veterinary College. I think he doesn't need any introduction. Everybody in the industry knows him in the academia and the research, so he's a great support for the industry. Then we have Dr. Rahul Kole, joining us from Sherwal Veterinary College and expertise in the veterinary public health. So looking forward to your presentation, Dr. Rahul. Then we have Dr. Kiran Bhilegaonkar sir, who is the principal scientist and station in charge at ICR IVI Regional Center at Pune, and such a distinguished personality with a great expertise in the subject of food safety and veterinary public health. So we are really looking forward to learn from you, sir. Then we have Dr. Pradeep Malik. Welcome, sir. Really appreciate you sparing valuable time with us. Dr. Pradeep Malik, a senior professor emeritus at the Wildlife Institute of India, a renowned personality in the area of wildlife. So if I start talking about his CV, so I think it will require at least one full session. So in the interest of time, I'll just keep it his introduction to this minimal. And once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. There would be certain presentations made by the speakers would be available for uploading on INFA website. And we look forward for your active participation through this Q&A. So first and foremost, I invite INFA President, Mr. Vijay Tang, for his address.
Thank you, Dr. Makhija. Good morning to all of you. On behalf of INFA Managing Committee, I also take this privilege to welcome all of you to this very special program on World Zoonosis Day. If I make an opening statement, I would like to say that preventing disease in animals does not only protect their well-being, but it is also one of the most effective steps we can take in protecting our own health. Animals on the farm, they produce safe food, while pets in our homes, they are very important companions to our families. However, when animals fall sick, it impacts our health as well. It is estimated that almost 60% of the diseases in the world are zoonotic, means it can spread from animals to people. There are almost 2.4 billion cases of human illness, which have been estimated to be spreading from animals to people. They're also responsible for almost 2.2 million deaths per year. It has also been seen that zoonosis has a great impact on the economy. Between a period of 1995 and 2008, it was estimated that close to $120 billion were spent to manage and mitigate diseases originating from animals. While it is easy to say that simple steps such as washing your hands, which we have practiced all through the COVID, mosquito prevention, improvisation on the cooking techniques, will limit our exposure to zoonotic disease. But ultimately, the most effective method is preventing an animal from contracting disease altogether. We are better protected when the animals remain healthy, whether they are in the farm or they are in the home. They are invaluable to almost 70% of the poorest of the poor who depend on the livestock for their livelihoods. And the countless people that we have welcomed in our lives in the form of pets. We're also talking a lot about One Health. We're also talking a lot about AMR. I think when we are preventing diseases, we are building a better nutrition, better biosecurity, a better immune system in the animals. We are also reducing the dependence on antibiotics and preventing future outbreaks. We at INFA and the members of INFA, we are trying to work on all these three cornerstones, whether it is prevention, nutrition, disease mitigation. And we are committed to enhance the focus on all these elements which are going to mitigate the diseases, prevent the diseases, and automatically help us in mitigating the spread of diseases from animals to human beings. In our mythology, traditionally in our culture, in our beliefs, the concept of One Health has been imbibed for time immemorial. Culturally, we situate humans, animals, and birds on the same plane of existence. And in fact, that brings us to this concept of preventing the zoonotic transmission. On this year's World Zoonosis Day, the theme is Let's Break the Chain of Zoonotic Transmission. It's important to note that of late, we have also seen many cases of reverse zoonosis. There are cases being reported of COVID-19, of the new variants of corona, which has infected some of the companion animals. And also, we have seen the emergence of some of the diseases, recent diseases like lumpy skin disease. So let's collaborate on this platform to learn and make a collective effort in increasing awareness towards zoonosis and the importance of safeguarding health for animals and prevent the future epidemics and pandemics. It's very vital that we work together, collaborate. And it's a great occasion that today we have the research, we have the academia, and we have the industry together on this platform to work together and collaborate together. So thank you very much, and we wish you a wonderful session. And I'm hopeful at the end of the day, we are going to have a great outcome which can be taken to the masses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay Tang, for your presidential address. We'll again come back to you during our Q&A session, so please be there. Let me now have the privilege and honor to invite Professor Dr. Ajit Ranade sir for his keynote address. Thank you, sir.
Namaskar. Good morning, everybody. First of all, greetings on the occasion of the World Zoonosis Day. And also, thanks to INFA, the managing committee of INFA, and Vijay Makhija in particular for inviting me to speak on this occasion and share some of the thoughts with you on this World Zoonosis Day. Welcome, Dr. Kolhe, Dr. Vilegaonkar, and Dr. Malik. I'm so happy that Dr. Malik is there, because we always say that, the problems are coming from the wild animals, from the wildlife, and there is somebody who is there who is the authority to talk on that. I'm very happy, sir. I'm very eager to listen to you. Dr. Kolya and Dr. Bilegavkar, of course, they are my colleagues, and they are being introduced to this particular platform for the first time, and I'm sure everybody will relish their talks as well. Dr. Shirish Nigam, our friend, Dr. Teng from the association, INFA, and Vijay. Very good morning to everybody. As we all know that the World Zoonosis Day is celebrated every year on 6th of July to commemorate the work of French biologist Louis Pasteur. Because on 6th of July 1885, Louis Pasteur successfully administered the first vaccine against rabies to the human beings. We also know that livestock and animal husbandry is integral to the sustainable livelihood security, global food demand, employability, and contribution to the national GDP. Therefore, more investment in this sector is warranted. This particular sector has employed at least 1.3 billion people throughout the globe directly, and it supports the livelihood of about 600 million poor families or stakeholders and the farmers in the developing world. Endemic animal diseases, transboundary diseases, and zoonosis are the major challenges before the livestock sector. And as Dr. Teng mentioned, in the recent past, zoonotic diseases have emerged to a great extent, and unfortunately, 61%, yes, 61% of all known human pathogens are originating from animals. World Health Organization, Animal Health, that is OIE, has identified about 181 animal diseases as notifiable based on their potential to impact on the trade. The latest report, entitled Preventing the Next Pandemic, Zoonotic Diseases and How to Break the Chain of Transmission, is being launched today on the World Zoonosis Day 2021. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to take lives and disrupt the economies across the world, a new report warns that further outbreaks will emerge unless the government and the policymakers take some strict measures to prevent the zoonotic diseases in the country. To prevent the zoonotic diseases from crossing into the human population, and sets out 10 recommendations to prevent the future pandemics. These 10 recommendations are investing in interdisciplinary approaches, including One Health. Then second is expanding scientific inquiry into zoonotic diseases. Third is improving cost-benefit analysis of interventions to include full cost accounting of societal impacts of the disease. The fourth is raising awareness of zoonotic diseases. Then strengthening monitoring and regulation practices associated with zoonotic diseases, including food systems. Then incentivizing sustainable land management practices and developing alternatives for food security and livelihoods that do not rely on destruction of habitats and biodiversity. Then improving the biosecurity and the control, identifying key drivers of emerging diseases in animal husbandry, and encouraging proven management and zoonotic disease control measures. Then supporting the sustainable management of landscapes as well as seascapes that enhance sustainable coexistence of agriculture and wildlife, and strengthening the capacities among the health stakeholders of all countries. And last is operationalizing the One Health approach in land use and sustainable development planning, implementation, and monitoring, among other fields. It is estimated that approximately 75% of the new human pathogens reported in the last 25 years have originated in animals, and the risk of zoonosis is predicted to continue to increase. Especially the RNA viruses pose a particularly greater threat than the DNA viruses because they can emerge and spread rapidly. Against the background of zoonosis accounting for about 60% of the new disease introductions, the megacities of the world provide the obvious focus of attention as they typically constitute melting pot environments for the mixing of human and animal infectious diseases and their potential rapid spread among the population. Dr. Malik, as you are aware and you are there to talk about it, wildlife is seen as increasingly important in transmission of zoonotic pathogens, which include the fruit bat, which is known as a reservoir of internationally important zoonotic pathogens such as Hendra virus and Nipah virus. Greater risks to human health from wildlife pathogens appear to be inevitable as a consequence of increasing human contact with wildlife through greater access to the disturbance of wild habitats, the friction, the conflict between the land or the humans and the wildlife because of industrialization, urbanization, and whatnot. Wild and pre-domestic animals and birds, therefore, are the major natural reservoirs of zoonotic pathogens, and in the past 3 decades, most of the novel emergent zoonotic infectious diseases have originated from wildlife. Most of the emerging zoonotic infections are from the viruses belonging to Flaviviridae, Orthomyxoviridae, and Coronaviridae families. High mutation rate in RNA viruses and their potential of global spread via unknown reservoirs is a matter of great concern. Some of the RNA viruses and pandemics caused by them are basically, as we know, coronavirus. We are going through that pandemic as of now. These are single-stranded positive sense enveloped RNA viruses, and it is the largest group of viruses. They cause respiratory, enteric, neurological, and hepatic diseases in many animal species, including human beings. Coronaviruses are further divided into 4 major genera as we are talking about nowadays: alpha, beta, delta, and gamma. And the bats and the rodents are considered as the gene source for alpha and beta coronaviruses. Then second is influenza viruses. Bird flu comes to the same category, and they are enveloped negative strand segmented RNA viruses, and there are 6 genera under this family: type A, B, C influenza viruses, Thogotovirus, and Isa virus. And recently type D has been added, which affects the cattle. Then flaviviruses like Japanese encephalitis, West Nile, dengue, yellow fever, St. Louis encephalitis are examples of flaviviral diseases. Therefore, according to WHO, the detection of zoonotic pathogens in animals and humans, collaborative approach and coordination between health and veterinary sectors is mandatory requirement. For prevention, control, and elimination of zoonotic diseases, long-term actions are required. The role and tasks to be undertaken under the Common Agenda for Zoonosis Control Program at national and international level needs to be formulated, and the One Health approach, which we always have been talking about, needs to be really taken into account, and we all, veterinarians, human doctors, and other scientists should work together to develop a strategy to fight against these diseases. At national level, programs should be implemented in collaboration jointly by veterinary and health sectors involving different stakeholders like epidemiologists, occupational health workers, food technologists, specialists in environmental control and laboratory personnel, NGOs as well, and political support from the concerned ministries. Extensive awareness programs on regional zoonosis needs to be implemented using electronic media and information and communication technologies in future to keep the people aware about the happening with respect to the zoonotic diseases, their threats, and the ways and means to prevent them. With this intention, I think this particular day we must celebrate by organizing such lectures, and I'm very happy that INFA has organized 3 important topics today. One will be dealt with Rahul Kolle, one by Dr. Bhilegaonkar, and third, of course, Dr. Pradeep Malik. And we all are eager to listen to you. So with these words, I stop here for the day, and I wish all success for this seminar. Thank you very much, Vijay.
Thank you, Dr. Ranade. I think you have brought in a very diverse kind of views, thoughts, and suggestions into the process. And your suggestion of national level program and a collaborative effort across all stakeholders is a very welcome thought, and I am sure that we will be working closely on this. So we will be definitely taking up some of these suggestions forward and try to, because that we may not be able to discuss in the length each suggestion from your side, but definitely we can pick up 3-4 of them and try to implement and work with all the stakeholders. So thank you very much for stimulating the thought process and providing a broad direction which can be taken forward. Thank you very much. And now we come to Dr. Rahul Kole. And Dr. Kole, over to you for your presentation and session. Thank you,
Dr. Ting. First of all, I am thankful to the organizers, Indian Federation of Animal Health Companies, for giving me this opportunity to speak on the occasion of World Zoonosis Day. Rather, I would be too young to speak on this platform in front of Dr. Malik and Dr. Bhilegaonkar. But the topic which has been assigned to me is One Health and Emerging Zoonosis. So what Dr. Vijay Makhija has told me that there are several participants who would be totally new to the world of zoonosis. So for them, I just wanted to give a little bit introduction about the zoonosis. Zoonosis are basically the diseases which are transmitted from animals to human beings. And there are few diseases which can accidentally transmit from humans to animal also. So in order to mitigate the challenges associated with these zoonotic diseases, nowadays the concept or the approach which is being implemented is One Health approach that definitely I'm going to talk on. So why this One Health and One Medicine concept is important. So before talking into detail about the concept, we should remember these two legendary people. One is Rudolf Virchow, who has actually quoted between animals and human medicine, there is no dividing line, nor it should be. He is a person who has actually proposed the concept of one medicine. And in modern era of science, the person who has actually propagated the concept is Professor Calvin Schaub. So this One Health concept is very important in terms of shared zoonosis, the zoonotic diseases which are associated with livestock and pets, then the problems associated with food safety, food security, wildlife reservoirs and human health, global environment, climate change, the issues associated with antimicrobial resistance, and of course the importance of One Health in the context of comparative medicine and biomedical research too. So let us have a very quick overview of how many pathogens that are actually responsible for causing human illness. So according to World Health Organization, approximately 25% of all global deaths, they are caused by microbes. And altogether there are 1,415 species of known bacteria, fungi, viruses, rickettsia, protozoan, and helminths. But surprisingly, 61% of all these known pathogens are zoonotic in nature, and most of them, more than 97%, they are originating from animals. It means that animals are the important reservoir for harboring, transmission, perpetuation of these zoonotic pathogens. Then as far as new or novel pathogens they are concerned, again there are 175 newly recognized diseases, and out of them 75 to 80% diseases, they are zoonotic in nature. This is a very dangerous thing, highly challenging in the context of globalization. This table also depicts that in last 30 years we have come across several zoonotic diseases, and out of which most of the pathogens, they have been originated from animals. Some of the novel pathogens emerged like SARS, MERS, Corona, influenza. Okay, so in last century as well as the current century, we have recorded some of the epidemics, right, from Spanish flu, that is avian influenza, immediately after the World War I, then Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, the problem associated with the cholera, L-1 type strain which has been emerged from India and Bangladesh, smallpox, plague, SARS, avian influenza, which is emerged in 2009, and then Ebola, which is endemic in the African context, Zika, dengue, plague, and very recently the COVID-19. Even this COVID-19 also have some of the linkages associated with the animals. So if you will see all these emerging pathogens or the episodes which have been recorded in the last century and the current century, most of the pathogens, they are of zoonotic nature. Now, when we speak about the adaptation of the zoonotic pathogens to the animal population or human population, how pathogen emerge from the animals and how it get adapted to the human cycle. So there are different stages. So broadly, there are 5 important stages. Why I'm telling all these stages? Because the interventions which we have to implement it at what stage, and that will come up with the fruitful result. So at stage 1, the pathogen is only restricted to the animal population. In stage 2, animal to human transmission is possible. In stage 3, animal to human and human to human transmission is also possible. And in stage 4 and 5, we can get the larger outbreaks. And in stage 5 particularly, the pathogen has nothing to do with the animal and only human to human transmission is possible. Very classical example we can see if the Nipah virus outbreak, the swine flu outbreak of 2009, that has impacted upon the pork industry, but that pathogen has nothing to do with the swine. It was totally adapted to human transmission. There are basically different domains which we need to have integrated activities. So there are 3 important interfaces at which we have to have collaborative activities in order to prevent, control, or rather eliminate the diseases, including zoonotic and emerging diseases. So these 3 interfaces are human environment interface, human animal interface, and animal environment interface. Definitely Dr. Malik will speak much detail on this particular aspect. There are several examples that how demographic changes and the human activities or anthropogenic activities have led to the emergence of the disease agents or pathogen. So some of the classical examples I can tell here that ecological changes, deforestation, increase in the wild activities, they have led to the emergence of Nipah virus, Rift Valley fever virus, Korean hemorrhagic fever virus. Even some of the pathogens are associated with the advancement in the technology, like the strains of E. coli 157H7 strain. These strains, they have emerged. Then the breakdown in the public health system can also lead to the emergence of some of the pathogens. Definitely, I will not go into the details of that. This particular chart, there are 4 different graphs, A, B, C, and D. This will give you a very brief idea about what type of emerging diseases they are prevalent in the global scale. So the first where you can see red plus yellow highlighted spots. So those are the events of zoonotic pathogens associated with wildlife. Then in second, these are the zoonotic pathogens which are associated with non-wildlife, means the other animals are playing important role in that. Then third is the problem associated with the drug-resistant pathogen, and fourth is the problem associated with vector-borne pathogens. And A and D, particularly the pathogens originating from wildlife and the problems associated with vector-borne pathogens or vector-borne diseases, they are highly popular or spread world over. Okay, now taking into account these all problems associated with the emergence of the novel pathogens, World Health Organization has actually created a list of the priority pathogens or the disease that is called as actually the WHO's blueprint for priority diseases requiring urgent R&D, and altogether there are 10 pathogens included in this list, and unfortunately all of them are zoonotic, like Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, Ebola, Marburg, Lassa virus, Middle East respiratory syndrome virus, severe acute respiratory syndrome virus, Nipah and Nipah viruses, Rift Valley, Zika, and X diseases. X diseases basically the pathogens whose epidemiology is not clearly understood. So probably the COVID-19 could be one of the examples of the X diseases. And for this, CEPI in collaboration with WHO is funding for R&D, including the development of the vaccines. So when we speak about the zoonosis, it spread the different drivers which are present into the environment of nature, which perpetuate the possibility of transmission of zoonosis. So one concept under one umbrella we can work. So that is nothing but the concept of One Health. Actually, there is no uniform definition of One Health, but the definition which is suggested by CDC is very popular, and it defines One Health as it is a collaborative, multi-sectoral and transdisciplinary approach working at local, regional, national and global levels with the goal of achieving optimum health outcomes, recognizing the interconnection between people, animal, plants and their shared environment. So in nutshell, the foundation of One Health is actually dependent upon 3 C's, that is communication, coordination and collaboration among human, animal and environmental sectors. So we have to integrate all our activities at these 3 different spheres. Okay. So a lot of initiatives, after the outbreak of SARS in 2003, then the 2005 highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses, lot many initiatives at international level, they are associated with the planning and implementation of One Health activities. And now all international organizations like WHO, FAO, OIE, World Bank, even some private organizations like Gates Foundations, they joined the hands in order to implement the activities associated with One Health. Very recently in 2019, the One Health India conference was organized in Delhi under the aegis of Department of Biotechnology, then in collaboration with DARE, ICR, ICMR, and World Bank. So they come up with some recommendations. Those recommendations are basically associated with the development of One Health roadmap. So what should be the roadmap for implementation of One Health activities at global scale? And they have principally focused on the 10 points. So those points are associated with, first is nothing but the review, update, and documentation of the current disease situation of the zoonotic diseases, including antimicrobial resistance. Then second is associated with identification of the priority areas of the diseases, then promotion of basic and applied research, and very important, capacity building of students, scientists, researchers, NGOs, and all. And sixth is associated with sharing of the information, then defining the role of various governments, and incentivization, which is the biggest hurdle in implementation of any R&D program. So the fund requirements, how to manage the fund. And the last recommendation of this One Health roadmap was the One Health communication and implementation of outreach programs for different stakeholders. So from this recommendation, we can see that all those activities are associated, probably without involvement of different sectors, we cannot implement or we cannot go through the path of One Health roadmap. So when we speak about the zoonosis now, it is clear to most of us that zoonotic diseases will continue to emerge, but how we can implement One Health approach in mitigation of the zoonosis? So we have to have a strategic framework for that. And while designing a strategic framework, we have to give focus on some points. So those points include prioritization of zoonotic diseases, because zoonotic diseases, they differ. The list of zoonotic diseases is very exhaustive. So the diseases which are present in Africa, they are totally different from the diseases which are prevalent in India. So nationwide prioritization of zoonotic diseases is highly mandatory, which is warranted. Then assessment, real-time assessment of disease burden. So we have to have here the help of some other sectors. We need to have mathematical models for assessment of the actual burden of the zoonotic diseases. Then we have to have a zoonotic disease surveillance program, disease specific as well as priority specific zoonotic disease surveillance program we need to implement. Then we have to have joint hands both by medicine and veterinary sector for the response and investigation of the outbreak. Then we need to have the strengthening of the laboratory network among health and veterinary sector. What we have seen in very latest COVID-19, almost all veterinary colleges, they are now associated with diagnosis of COVID-19. This is for the first time the public health sector has taken help of veterinary sector in COVID-19. And the very last strategic framework point should be real-time implementation of prevention and control strategies associated with the zoonotic diseases. There are several stages wherein we can implement those strategies. So something which provides the opportunities for implementation of interventions. So the best possibility of implementation of intervention is before recording the illness. So it will help in not only prevention of the outbreaks, but it will also give a very basic idea about the actual status of the disease in a population. So interventions before in recording illness in animal and human, it is warranted as far as prevention of emerging and zoonotic diseases they are concerned. Actually, there are very different type of strategies they are being implemented. But when we are talking about One Health and definitely then under the One Health, this umbrella approach for prevention and control of zoonotic diseases is highly significant, which is actually the aggregation of surveillance, then the laboratory networking, prevention and control strategies. It also focuses on the treatment aspect, educating, creating awareness among the people, and of course the help of the government for formulation of the legislation. So this umbrella approach is very pertaining to the prevention and control of zoonosis. When we speak about the implementation of any strategy, of course, there are different challenges. And of course, One Health is basically the collaboration and coordination of so many sectors. And when we try to join hands with different sectors, we come up with different challenges. So we have to mitigate those challenges. So which are those challenges? So this I could find from one good literature. So some of the challenges for implementation of One Health program at national level or global level, they include commercial interests, then lack of intersectoral communication, lack of intersectoral trust. We should have trust on each other. Then in silos education, yeah, this is something which is very detrimental to the implementation of One Health, and silos funding. So these are the challenges. Fortunately, veterinary community has come forward for implementation of the several One Health activities, but unfortunately, medical side is very slow and sluggish in implementation of One Health activities at national level, even at international level, in spite of huge cooperation of the World Health Organization. So with these words, a small take-home message that definitely One Health is a very promising tool to address the issues at animal, human, and environment ecosystem, but definitely there are several challenges also. So the just take-home message on the occasion of World Zoonosis Day is that let's communicate, coordinate, and collaborate for a common goal. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my views on the platform of INFA, and I wish you all a very happy World Zoonosis Day. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. Now we request Dr. Kiran Bhilegaonkar sir to start his presentation.
So good morning to all, and first of all I would like to thank the organizers, INFA executive, for giving this opportunity to talk on this very important food safety regulation subject, which is very near and dear to everyone. Food safety impacts each one of us, and all the executive members of the INFA, dear participants, my colleague, expert speakers. So I will be talking on the food safety regulations. Main focus would be on the foods of animal origin, and initially I would just talk on introductory aspect, then structure a little bit, and then actual regulations related to foods of animal origin. So I need not introduce you the food safety. It's touching each one of us lives. And you get to see a lot of world newspaper headlines in India as well as world. Such kind of a newspaper headlines we have seen. Recently, there were issues related to Maggi, then antibiotic residues in chicken, and all kinds of pesticides in Coke. COVID also, fortunately, it's not a food safety issue, but it has impacted. And initial days, there were a lot of hue and cry about the food safety issues related to COVID-19. Among different food safety or food hazard issues, we have a microbial hazard, which is very important. Then there are drug residues in case of foods of animal origin. Very recently, it has also started coming up in the agriculture sector also, pesticide residues, different contaminants, heavy metals, and other safety issues like genetically modified foods as well as allergens. These keep on cropping up. And foods, particularly animals, that is foods of animal origin, they are at the prime because of rich nutrient content. They can support growth of microbes as well as continuous bioaccumulators. They keep on accumulating pesticides as well as antibiotic treatment. So all kinds of problems, they can appear through foods of animal origin, and human gets exposed very frequently through foods of animal origin. Regarding magnitude of the foodborne illnesses, globally, it's very difficult to estimate, but in 2015, a World Health Organization report has come where they have stated that almost 600 million cases, they occur annually with about 4 lakh deaths. You can see here among different cases, again, diarrheal diseases and the infectious agents, they constitute majority. Chemicals, that is antibiotic, pesticides, it's relatively less because it's cumulative effect, it's a chronic effect, and to gauge actual impact of these, it's very difficult. So most of the times, the cases due to microbes, they get to be reported. In India, the situation is like we are in the middle of different outbreak, the cases per 1 lakh population. So around 8,500 or 8,600 cases they have in India. And when you convert it into the population of about 1.3 billion, we get almost 110 or 111 million cases. And with a huge losses due to these cases, almost 50 billion US dollars is estimated loss. But these estimates seems to be a little underreported, and people, the study which was done by ILRI and Wageningen University of Netherlands, they have estimated that we are getting almost 3 billion, means almost each individual is suffering on an average twice during a year because of some diarrheal episode or some kind of a foodborne illness episode. Each and everyone has a role for protection from these food safety hazards. The consumers, they have a role in terms of hygiene maintenance, storage, cooking practices, and everything at home. Industry has a role and responsibility of manufacturing good quality of food material with all the safety precaution, manufacturing hygiene practices. And government has a responsibility and role in terms of setting and enforcing the national food safety standards or regulation. Then any unsafe food should not go into the chain for consumption. All import is also regulated by these national government regulatory agencies like in India, Food Safety Standard Authority. And of course, one of the important and key functions of them is education and public awareness programs, continuous training for the food safety. Coming to food safety regulations per se, my topic, you can see here a timeline of this food safety regulations in India. 2006 was a watershed year where Food Safety and Standard Act came. And all these different regulations which were governed by different ministries like Meat Food Products Order or PFA, Prevention of Food Production, Food Adulteration Act, MMPO, all these were clubbed together and now all have come under one umbrella, that is Food Safety and Standards Regulation 2011. So now we have a one nation, one food law. So everything is clubbed together. These old laws, they are now being continuously upgraded based on the science, and they are continuously modified. Now, this Food Safety Standard Act 2006 and FSSR 2011, it is a mandatory. You know that there are other organizations like BIS, you have seen ISI marks, and then AgMark marks were also there. But these now standards are voluntary, and only FSSR 2011 is a mandatory. When Food Safety Standard Authority endorses some of the commodities of AgMark or BIS, or they say that these standards should be followed for such commodities, then only it becomes mandatory. Like BIS standards are mandatory for packaged drinking water, infant foods, and milk powders. So then everyone has to follow those. Likewise, for AgMark also, some of the commodities like oils and ghees, FSSAI has endorsed those standards. There are different sections in food safety standard regulations, right from licensing and registration to all kinds of methodologies, samplings, and analysis. The red marked circled sections, they pertain to the food safety. The food product standards, it encompasses the biological hazards or microbiological limits, and the contaminant, toxin, residues, it contains pesticide, heavy metals, and antibiotic residues standards. There are additionally recently introduced some standards like for nutraceuticals, all kinds of the special foods for medical or dietary purposes. This nutraceutical regulation is there, then organic foods, other standards have also been incorporated in the regulations. Related to the Food Safety Standard Authority structure, this is a central Food Safety Standard Authority, and vertically as we go down, the State Food Safety Authority, these are the vertical structure for implementation. And the key part in setting of standard is done by the scientific panels. They do all kinds of risk assessment, all the data is taken into consideration, and then they suggest standards for different commodities and for different hazards. And then they are being endorsed by the scientific committee, and finally it is being approved by the Food Safety and Standard Authority, which has different members from different sectors, experts as well as industry. So this is the path of approval of standards. Regarding scientific panels, there are these 10 scientific panels which are called as a subject matter scientific panels. You can see here pesticide residue panel, antibiotic residues, biological hazard which deals with microbes. They cut across different commodities, like this pesticide residue panel will set standards for vegetables, crops, eggs, fish, animals, and all kinds of product, milk, etc. Likewise for other panels also, it's cutting across commodity subject matter. But there are vertical panels which are the commodity specific panels. These panels, they set standard for specific products, like in case of milk and milk product, it may be khoa, it may be ghee, it may be condensed milk. So these specific product standards are being set by these vertical scientific panel commodities. Coming to the actual regulations, first I'll talk about the licensing and registration regulation. Depending on the size of food business operation, we have PT food business operators where local authorities, they give registration, or as it grows up, the state and central licensing authorities, they give registrations. And the petty food business operators are those which are below 12 lakhs of overall annual turnover. In case of milk and milk product, it is less than 500 liters. For the animal slaughter, it's a 2 large animal or 10 sheep and goat and 50 poultry birds. So here they have, instead of for petty feed business operators, usually it is registration, but for foods of animal origin, these particular animals, they are also insisting on the licensing also. And for milk producers who are members of cooperatives, they are exempt from this provision. And each registered food business operator, they have to follow the general hygiene and sanitary practices. So it is must for them. It is given in the Schedule 4 of this Act. For licensing, as I have told you, as it increases the number size, the central licensing is must. And every food business operator should possess a valid registration or license, without which it cannot operate. So it is a must now. And for licensing requirement, in addition to this hygiene and Schedule 4, there are several other requirements like food safety management system is must, GMP, HACCP compliance, plus there are other food from farm to fork food chain, they have to ensure that there is a food safety. These are hygiene requirements which are important for petty food business operator. Different hygiene requirement for milk and milk products, slaughter, street vendors, as well as caterers have been given in this part. Then coming to contaminants, toxins and residues, this section of regulation contains all the metal, drug and pesticide residues. Here, I would just give you a brief highlight. I have compiled these this information. Like here, you can see it's for lead, arsenic, tin, metals, different parts per million values, maximum residue limit values have been given. Similarly, for pesticide residues just collected for meat and poultry, but similar values are there for milk and other products also. So different pesticide residues have been given. Antibiotic residues, there were not no regulations were there, particularly for foods of animal origin. Fish, it was there. There were 23 antibiotics and drugs which were there in the food FSSR or even previous PFA. But now in 2019, this 43 antibiotics and drugs, they have come into the ambit of FSSR. Here you can see just the first page of that different drugs and different commodities. Somewhere it is given for all edible tissues. Somewhere it has been split separately as a muscle, liver, and fat, and so on and so forth. So these regulations are there for 43 different drugs. Microbiological limits, they have been given in this section, that is food product standards and food additives, as well as additives part is also there in this section. Microbiological limits, they were again recently modified in 2016. Gazette notification was issued for milk and meat product. And these are divided into two different process hygiene criteria and food safety criteria. Why these two? The process hygiene criteria includes aerobic plate counts, yeast and mold counts, which do not have any impact on safety. So they are applicable only during the production stage, that is up to the end of processing in the factory. So only hygiene improvement is suggested and a lot is not rejected if these limits are crossed. But food safety criteria, they contains pathogen, and if it is present, it is applicable throughout the food chain. So right from the production to the consumption, it is applicable throughout the shelf life. And if it is present, then if the organism is present or beyond limit, then lot is rejected, or if it has gone into market, it has to be recalled. So this is just an example, meat and meat product process hygiene criteria. You can see here aerobic plate count, yeast and mold count, and so on and so forth. And these are different product categories, 9 product categories in case of meat, like from raw to cooked meat to canned meat. Same here for food safety criteria, it's a Salmonella, Listeria, these pathogens, they are, or Clostridium perfringens. Campylobacter is important for, particularly this is applicable in case of poultry only, not for others. So different kinds of pathogens are listed here. Similarly, for milk and milk products, there are 14 categories, different categories like pasteurized milk to milk powders to all kinds of indigenous product of paneer, khoa, and other products are there. These are mostly process-based categories because microbes, they change in numbers as per the process, and its risk also changes as per the process. So safety criteria, again, Salmonella and Listeria and other Chronobacter, which is important for infant food formula. As I was telling you, the vertical standards are set by the vertical panels of milk and milk product. There are certain standards like for milk, for khoa. Mostly these are compositional parameters, how much fat, non-fat or other components must be there in this product, and all the safety standards are referred in the respective sections. Same thing with the meat and meat product. Different vertical standards are there for fresh, chilled, or eggs, or for canned, retort, pouch meat. So different vertical standards are there. Nutraceutical as such, it is not applicable for foods of animal origin, but just since you are from animal health and many of you might be doing all the nutraceutical productions also. So these are recent standards which have been introduced for different health supplements, nutraceuticals, and foods for special dietary purposes, special medicinal purposes, or any novel foods. Then packaging and labeling, for us, a very important feature is the mark on the symbol on the package. Previously, it was the red dot symbol in red square, but now this has been changed because some of the colorblind people, they were not able to differentiate between the green and red dots. So now it has been changed to the triangle, the red triangle. Very recently in January 2021, it has been changed. Food testing also, there are regulations, all kinds of reference methods, laboratory identification, referral laboratories, everything is being, there are regulations. FSSAI plays a key role in all these aspects. And all these laboratories, unless and until they are accredited laboratories, they are not allowed for any food testing, and their validity is not there unless they are accredited laboratory. Finally, to conclude, standard setting is a science-based process. It's a dynamic, continuous process. We need to have a risk assessment done, which is quite lacking in India. A lot of data is required. Strengthening of food safety management system, particularly for MSMEs in India, it's a big challenge. All auditing systems, educating the bodies, tribunals, everything is now in the phase of growth, infrastructure, laboratories. Fortunately, in private sector, there are very good laboratories, industrial sector, but not in the government sector. Accredited laboratories are there, particularly in animal milk and meat product. We are lacking in this aspect. And capacity building is a continuous process. It keeps going on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kiran sir, for such an insightful presentation. Now we move to the next presenter, Dr. Pradeep Malik sir. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Teng, and thank you, Dr. Makhija, for inviting me for this presentation. I'm also very thankful to Dr. Ajit Ranade, the Dean of the Bombay Veterinary College, and Dr. Kiran Bhalegaonkar and Dr. Rahul Kole to cover several of the points which I wanted to cover. But due to the positive time, I think this is a great idea that some of the points are very well covered by them. Now, we have to talk about some of the missing linkages which were not talked about the previous speakers, and I think the participants will really enjoy to learn something about these missing linkages. We have to consider that, we have very large number of protected areas in India, but one of the important issues is that these protected areas are very small in size, let's say about 250 to 300 square or 500 square kilometer in area. And within these small size protected areas, if you see the amount of pressure these protected areas have for every kind of human need who live at the interface or near the forest resources, 65% PAs are inhibited. There is a large number of rural population. There is more than 90 million livestock which is grazes inside, and we are harvesting all kind of things from these protected areas, including medicinal plants. There is another very important issue, at the interface of these protected areas. There's a large number of animals. They use the interface for agricultural crops, because agricultural crops are very luring for some of the animals, like, Nilgai, which is the largest antelope. We have 4 antelopes in India, and Nilgai blue bull is the largest antelope in India. There are elephants, and there are examples of several other species which use interface. And this is at this interface that communication of the many zoonotic pathogens can take place between the domestic animals and wild animals, and vice versa, including humans. There are some other, there are many important challenges. These are some of the very important challenges which are being faced by the protected area managers these days. But disease is one of the very important challenge because of these interface conflict regions. Now, if you see, some of these points are already covered. But what is happening is, what is not being covered here is that in most of the talks I hear, that we say that diseases are taking place, zoonotic diseases are taking place. What is the number of these zoonotic places? How, rapidly these pathogens are evolving. But we are not talking that why these things are happening. Why we have some of the diseases, maybe 15 or 20 or 30, which are not mentioned earlier in the books around 80s and 90s, in the Harrison books of medicine, of the human medicine, and in veterinary medicine book. None of these diseases are mentioned because these are all new pathogens. But we have to consider where from these pathogens have come and how these pathogens have come into the human system. One of the very important reason is that human behavior. If you see any disease, I can tell about 20 diseases, but some of the important diseases: SARS-1, Ebola, West Nile virus, monkeypox, AIDS, HIV. Why these are coming into the human environment is because humans are approaching these wildlife areas. Take example of Ebola. Ebola is a river in Congo Basin. About 30-35 years ago, for the bushmeat, this was a primate colony, separated from the rest of the world. There was no communication. But people in eventually reach to this small area near the river of Ebola in Congo Basin for the bushmeat. And a pathogen which was maintaining a symbiotic relationship, because pathogens, they don't want their entire host population to die, because otherwise they won't survive. So this virus jumped to humans, and in humans, it was able to establish very serious disease. So it is not because of the wildlife, it is because of the human behavior, the way we are coming into close contact with the increasing economic status of large number of people around the world, the way we are coming very close in variety of regions, very close to wildlife. Some of the very important other regions are these wildlife markets, wet markets in China and some other countries. What is happening is that because each species has its own pathogens of some kind, but when you bring wildlife from all parts of the world and put them together in these live markets, they get the chance to exchange the pathogens. And this is how SARS evolved. SARS-1, which was able to control, world was able to control it very nicely, but that would have become a serious problem. So this is how the pathogens get a chance to exchange themselves from one species to another species. Another very important region which is related to human behavior is that 13 million animals are traded each year. All sorts of animals are traded because of the variety of regions, and large number of these animals are not only for the food, but variety of animals are also being traded for keeping them as pet animals. There are other regions of interface issues and biodiversity loss. For example, cheetah population in African subcontinent, because of the disease, about 120 or 130 years ago, it came to only 12 individuals in the entire world in free-ranging situation. And if you see the entire cheetah population, which is now there in free-ranging as well as in captivity, that has come out from that very small number, 12 to 13 individuals. That is why entire cheetah population is susceptible to one very important disease known as feline leukemia. There are some other regions of human behavior, like the way we are creating, the environment very vulnerable in terms of providing opportunities to zoonotic pathogens. If you see in this side, we can see the cattle, you can see domestic dogs, you can see wild birds, and you will also see human beings just in the background. So these type of situations are creating perfect environment for zoonotic pathogens to involve and to travel vice versa from animals to man and man to animals. There are other very important regions for human behavior like global travel and aviation, and increasing number of industries, increasing number of vehicles. So these are variety of regions in terms of the human behavior, which are causing enormous influence on creating an environment for emerging pathogens. There are regions of climate change also. This is one of the very important issue which is being discussed as a very hot topic today everywhere in the world. Climate is one of the regions. If you can see, if there is a more flooding, definitely there will be more malaria and these things are happening in parts of Asian subcontinent. Then very important region is inequality in life. In the middle upper pictures, you can see the picture of Bombay. The people who are living in very compromised conditions and the people who are living in very good living conditions, they are not very separated. And people from very poor conditions, they visit the people who are living in much nicer conditions with better nutrition and food every day. So they are coming in close contact. What I want to say here is that unless there is a reasonable quality living in terms of the food, in terms of shelter, in terms of education, in terms of water, you will not be able to control these zoonotic diseases. We are talking is that what pathogens are emerging, how they are emerging, why they are emerging, how to control them, what can be the antimicrobials against them, what can be the vaccines. But we are not talking a very important basic question of inequality. Without removing this inequality, I cannot say that everyone will become very rich or everyone has the chance to become Bill Gates or any other rich. But there has to be a reasonable quality living for every human being, and including the nutrition and including health. Without that, we will not be able to conquer these zoonotic pathogens. There are some other very important regions because of the conflict around the world, especially Middle East conflict and conflict in several other parts of the world. there are a large number of people who are migrating. These migrations create a very, very disturbed environment, not only psychologically, but nutrition-wise also and health-wise also. And because of these reasons, there are pathogens who are looking for these opportunities for very compromised human population, so they can, develop themselves, in a way which can be more pathogenic to humans. So in summary, inequality in population pressure and development bias that finally leads to the degradation of the ecosystem function and processes. So this is one important summary for the part one. Now part two is geopolitics. In geopolitics, human migration and peri-urban settlements are very important, including conflict and war. If you see this picture of 1960s, when the humans, irrespective of the country boundaries, they were working together for the human development. If you see, the SR-71 was developed around 60s when there were no computers. The man was able to reach to the moon when there were no hi-fi computers. We were able to build 747-400 series plane, which is still one of the best plane in terms of, travel, in terms of landing and in terms of takeoff. We were able to build Antonov 225, which is the largest, transport plane in the world, which can carry the space shuttle on its back and fly from one place to another place. All these developments, took place when there were very large amount of problems which are facing today were not existing at all, like conflict and war and like migration. If you see this picture, antibiotic development. Today, the industry is focusing more on those pharmaceuticals which have a very long life, so which can be profitable to the industry. But where is the research? Where is the funding to these educational institutes and research institutes in terms of developing new antibiotics? If you see the newer vaccine, Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has been developed with the collaboration of the Oxford University. So in any kind of, these kind of pharmaceutical development or any kind of development in terms of engineering, the research is primarily done by the research scientists and their students and the postdocs. So where is the funding? Not only in India, India has been minimal always, but this kind of funding has also been reduced to a very small level in even the developed world. So that is why we do not have funding for searching new antimicrobials. If you see, in comparison to 2018 and in comparison to, this is the latest figure I have in terms of the military expenditure by country, we are spending almost, these are known figures, but unknown figures are much higher. We are spending almost $1,500 billion on military spending. But about 20 years ago, this expenditure was half. About 50 years ago, this expenditure was only about 20% of the 1,500 billion. So why we are doing this enormous expenditure on military in comparison to focusing and doing a small percentage of this expenditure for improving the human life? Then other things which are happening, I discussed already migrations. These are some of the very important migrations which have happened in the history. And there is a current migration of Afghanistan refugees, and there is a lot of migration which is taking place from Middle East to the European countries. Migrations place human society into an extreme amount of distress and provides the opportunity for pathogens to flourish and to establish permanently in the human ecosystem. These are some of the latest figures of human migration from the Middle East and some of the other countries which are taking place in European subcontinent. So to conclude, in Asiatic subcontinent, there are compromised human conditions giving rise to emerging pathogens. In Europe, there are a lot of sanctions against Russia, and Russia is becoming quite disturbed because of these regions, and that creates a lot of uncertainty. Everything has linkages to emerging pathogens. There is a continued, in the Middle East and Northern African subcontinent, there is a continued political uncertainty, civil war, and serious and militancy presents serious risk to health and living conditions because health systems are failing in rural areas. And if you take example of Ebola, the primary reason for Ebola came out of the system was terrorism, violence, and security risks and armed groups, which posed very serious and persistent risk to the stability in the region. and failure of the medical and veterinary system in sub-Saharan Africa. That was the region that, in spite of the best efforts for Ebola crisis became a threat to the economy in that region. And at some point of time, it became a very serious threat to the rest of the world also. So in summary, there is a worrying combination of variety of things which are happening in many parts of the world, providing opportunity to some of the very important pathogens. And this is the summary that, disrupted environment, promote disease emergence in many ways, toxic pollutants. Some of these things were discussed by Dr. Rahul Balegaonkar. Travel, population growth and urbanization and migration fears emergence of disease. Political and economic disruption impairs healthcare system in response to disease outbreaks. And there is a global increase in resistance to antimicrobial drugs and the reasons we discussed that why we do not have some new antibiotics in pipeline because of the lack of funding. So what can be done? If we take example of, before 1960, when we did not have antimicrobials, world was dealing with only one or two important diseases in the world. Around 1960, when we had the antibiotics, we were almost sure that we will be able to tackle any disease, and that was actually happening. But if you see, in spite of those antibiotics and new medicaments and new pharmaceuticals, from 1975 to today, we have enormous number of the diseases, and we do not have any very good answer as far as their control and prevention is concerned. So what can be done? And Dr. Rahul Kole was talking about One Health concept. I think that is one very important thing. But the important thing is that One Health concept is important. But how do you implement this One Health concept in terms of ecosystems of people, livestock and wildlife and natural communities? We are talking of intersectoral coordination. We are talking of the linkages. We are talking of the integration. But if you see the history of last 25, 30 years in India, we are disintegrating things. Veterinary education, veterinary sciences, animal sciences and agriculture have been separated. In future, there will be even the universities of fisheries. In future, there can be college of veterinary gynecology instead of just one veterinary school. So I am looking that there is an enormous disintegration happening. On the other hand, as far as in papers and books and journal articles, we are talking about linkages, intersectoral coordination. But in reality, in practical terms, we are doing things which are very opposite to what we are talking. So this is a very serious concern. So we need to also promote, education in global health concerns, research at the interface, coordinated research to find links between global weather patterns and infectious diseases. We need also ecological monitoring of our natural resources and hydrological basins. We also need to have an important role of animal health industry in terms of healthy people, healthy ecosystems, by reducing the number of the livestock, selective breeding at the native places, sustainable agriculture farming, and low-cost housing with, I think some words disappeared from here, low-cost housing with local materials.
I also invite my colleague Dr. Shirish Nigam from the INFA Managing Committee to also help us in this Q&A session. So, Dr. Nigam, over to you for kickstarting the Q&A session.
Thank you, Dr. Makhija, and thank you to all the MC members. And it's very exciting to know that we have more than 300 participants from different parts of the world, and we have many students also in this, and very interesting questions has been asked. So I would like to put one question for Dr. Ranade sir. People wants to know how industry, academia, and research institutions work together on concept of One Health. So Dr. Ranade, this is the question on One Health.
Yeah.
Please answer, sir.
This is the concept of One Health, where the academia, as Dr. Malik was rightly pointing out, that the funding is an issue. All the teaching institutions, they have one being for research. See, our mandate is we have teaching, research, and extension. So research comprises of 1/3 of the part. Unlike Dr. Balegaonkar, who is ICR Institute person, majority of the work is on research, whereas for us it is 1/3. And so the distribution of the funds also is not sufficient for the research activities and therefore the industry has to join hands with the educational institutes, with the universities. Our university, Maharashtra Animal and Fisheries Sciences University, is doing MOUs between the university and various industries so that the funding will come. And we have scientists. There is no dearth of people to work. No doubt it's 1/3 of the job, but still some of the scientists are really doing an excellent job. What we need is to join hands, identify the proposal, identify the topic, work out the outline of research work, calculate the funding required, and let there be a win-win situation where the work can be carried out. So we are in the process for that. In fact, at Mumbai Veterinary College Department of Poultry Science, we have already worked on such concepts, including development of certain projects or validating certain projects. In fact, this was the institute from where the postgraduate students, before submission of the master's degree thesis, have visited US, stayed there for 3 months, completed the internship and training, and they have come back. So these kind of associations should increase so that we can really handle and target the issues regarding the One Health which are facing. It's going to be, it's required, I mean, there will be a need of, complete partnership between human medicos, veterinarians, environmentalists, fisheries, even NGOs, societal issues will have to be considered. All should sit together. Whenever we organize some functions at the college, we always talk about it. Some guests from Hopkins will visit, some guests from KEM will visit. We always talk about it. But industry has to come forward and we should work jointly on the projects. That's what I personally feel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nalli. There is another question for Dr. Bhilegaonkar. Dr. Bhilegaonkar, people want to know what are the programs available for safe milk and meat production. Would you like to throw some light here, Doctor?
Programs means what they want? Training programs?
Training programs.
Okay. There is one fast-track trainings which are being organized. One big platform is there of Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. And they have different types of training. They have some basic trainings for hygiene and all kinds of petty food business operators. Then they have some advanced training for processing and everything. And then some specialized trainings are available for meat, poultry or milk sector. And there are almost 250 to 260 organizations who have already been registered with FSSAI for giving these trainings. All of them, they are not giving on all topics, but there certainly are a few dozens of organizations which are giving trainings on these meat and poultry. Another thing is CII and Hindustan Unilever. There is one capability initiative on that is SHIFTS, Capability Harnessing Initiative on Food Safety Sciences. They are organizing several training programs. Very recently, we have organized for meat and poultry sector a big training program for industry people from poultry, 2 trainings online for microbiology and 1 hands-on training, as well as throughout states, food safety officers were trained on the microbiology. So there are certain training programs available for all the sectors of this food, like milk, meat, fish, everything.
Sir, even Export Inspection Agency is also organizing their trainings regularly at Mumbai. They have very good facilities for capacity building in the laboratory, microbial risk assessment. Sir.
They also come under the FASTag. EIC also, they have also registered under FASTags.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bhilegaonkar, sir. Now, Dr. Rahul, there is a question for you. Which are the zoonotic diseases of poultry being of major significance?
Right. As far as poultry is concerned, the priority goes to definitely the avian influenza viruses. Then as far as foodborne pathogens, then they are concerned, there are 2 important pathogens. One is Campylobacter jejuni and another is Salmonella, because for all these 2 foodborne pathogens, which are again a priority pathogens, poultry are the reservoirs. So these 3, according to me, are important pathogens as far as poultry is concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. Now, I would like to put up one very important and last
Dr.
question.
Ranade, Dr. Ranade wants to say something.
Please, sir.
I just would like to add, Dr. Rahul mentioned about certain diseases, but because you said that there are some 300 odd people have already joined the seminar, I would like to share this information with everybody that newer and newer diseases, which we never knew are of zoonotic importance, are turning out to be zoonotic. The most important example I would quote is the mycoplasma. Now, when we were students, or still, we don't know, or we have never taught our students that CRD, mycoplasma, is a zoonotic disease. But it has gained the entry into the human body, and it causes the problems in the humans. I myself have suffered, that's why I'm sharing it with you. And it causes typical disease of the lungs, and you go for X-ray, you get the clouding and all. And I was lucky because I was at Mumbai, and it was a good clinician. He could diagnose. He asked me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm a poultry person." He said, for 8-10 days, he treated me, and then he said, "No, you are having a problem of mycoplasmosis." So the diseases which we never knew are affecting humans are now attacking human beings as well. So one has to be very careful, and we have to, I don't know, let's not speculate that, but maybe we'll have to increase the list of important diseases which are coming to humans from chickens.
Thank you, Ranade sir, for bringing the new insight. I have a question for our president of IMFA, Mr. Vijay Teng. People want to know, Teng Saab, what are the initiatives of IMFA towards reducing antimicrobial resistance? Please share your view, insight.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nigam. For the last few years, I would say that we have worked largely on this concept over which Dr. Rahul mentioned about communication, coordination, and collaboration. We were working in silos, but we started reaching out to different stakeholders. Like, we have never had an interaction with ICMR, because there were lots of communication gaps between the animal health industry and the medical fraternity. So we created multiple platforms of exchange of information, because you will be surprised to know that the medical fraternity was not really aware what is happening in the animal health industry, what kind of role is being played by them. And we kind of created, it was a kind of a One Health platform wherein we exchanged and communicated, shared our side of the story, and they shared their side of the story. So the first thing was to come together on common platform. See, AMR needs a stewardship. It is not a one-man job. It is a multiple stakeholders have to come together. And I think every speaker on this platform shared a similar view. Second is, when it came to our industry, education, awareness. We are talking about thousands and thousands of veterinarians who are spread across nook and corner of the country. So we are trying to reach out through INFA and INFA members and trying to promote judicious and rational use of antibiotics. I would like to state that antibiotics are essential. They are critical from a human health, the animal welfare point of view, disease mitigation point of view. You cannot shun away antibiotics. But what's important is how judiciously they are used, how responsibly they are used, and that has to be propagated and promoted to every veterinarian who is writing and prescribing antibiotics. So that is what is a major role, because India is a huge country, it's a large country, it's like a continent. And so that's what animal health industry and our members have been trying to work out together. The third, creating awareness about antibiotic residues, MRLs, and the withdrawal periods. Much before, I think I was very happy to listen to Dr. Bilegaonkar's presentation, and he brought in the topic of MRLs. Much before, it came into the law, the industry followed the global practice. Whatever are the MRLs prevalent in Europe and US, more or less we have been following, or in some cases ours have been a little stringent when we compared. So following the MRLs, propagating the withdrawal periods across, because you're not dealing only with the veterinarians, you're also talking to farmers. If there is a particular antibiotic which has a particular withdrawal period, then you need to communicate to the veterinarian as well as to the farmer. So that role has been played. Another very good example I would like to share on this platform, much before a very critical antibiotic, antimicrobial for human use, colistin, the industry came forward on its own to withdraw, forgetting about the commercial interests. When later on, I think after a 1.5 year or 2 years, then finally there was a notification from the DCGI's office. So what I'm trying to say is that industry is more than willing to come forward. But the industry should also not be projected as the villains, who just want to make profit. INFA would like to state here that we are for responsible, judicious use of antibiotics, and we want to create awareness and education across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teng, for your wonderful insight that we at INFA have a balanced approach. And now I would like to request my colleague, Dr. Vijay Makhija, to take over for concluding session. Over to you, Dr. Makhija.
Thank you, Dr. Sirish, for such a exciting panel session with all the discussions and proceedings very well summarized by the speaker. So I'd like to request all the experts in one line or short sentence, what should be your key take-home advice or message for the attendees. So we have hundreds of attendees joining today from both nationally, internationally. So I'll start with Dr. Ahande, sir, that what should be your key take-home message for us, sir?
As far as today's day is concerned, World Zoonosis Day, we are already going through a pandemic, facing the troubles which are arising out of that. And everybody is talking about newer and newer threats coming out of it. So what could be a one single line message? Don't lower your guards. Take the care as much as you can. Stay safe, stay healthy. Don't presume anything. Don't underestimate anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I move to Dr. Rahul Kole.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Makhija. Very short message is, let us join the hands, both institute, industry, since I am from the institute, educational institute. Unless and until we join the hands together, we cannot achieve a common goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kiran Bhelegaonkar, sir, over to you.
Right. So my message would be spread whatever you are learning to as a trainer to as many people as possible, and keep this torch of education going on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are still trying to, meanwhile, I request our president, Mr. Vijay Teng, to share his key take-home message for us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Makhija. I would say that look at industry as key partners for disease mitigation. We are there to play a very critical role for preventing diseases for animals. And automatically, if we are able to do that, you are going to play a very critical role in mitigating zoonosis and spread of diseases to the human beings. So if you're taking care of if you're taking care of animals, you're very well taking care of human beings. So we are there from vaccination point of view. We are there for nutrition, building up the immune system, and treatment of critical diseases. We are there to support all initiatives. We are there to collaborate. We are there to communicate. We are there to work with you. See us as partners, and we are more than willing to work with you.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay Teng. I could connect with Dr. Malik over telephonic line because his internet had some technical glitches. Dr. Malik, hope you can hear us.
I can hear you.
Yeah. So, Dr. Malik, we are in a conclusion of this wonderful webinar. So, any key take-home message for all our attendees? So, we have attendees from across the country and overseas. So, in one liner or shortly, if you can summarize.
Yeah, I think my very important message is that this is a very important thing that industry is thinking very carefully about the aspects of zoonosis. And one of the very important things I would like to say is that industry can play a very important role by just one example, that adopting under their CSR scheme some of the villages in some of the important national parks which are located at the interface of human environment and wildlife, and work towards improvement in the quality and life of people, including their livestock and agriculture economy. And as I said before the presentation, that we have to think in a very important way how to conserve the native livestock of this country, because they have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in a particular agricultural region. And we need to do the selective breeding among these species to enhance their production and reduce their number. That is going to be one of the very important things. And the other important thing is that the human population at this interface is very vulnerable in terms of the quality of their life and living. So we need to think the ways that how they can improve. So some of the pilot projects can be taken at some of the important, biodiversity sites in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malik, for joining. So we are at the conclusion of this webinar. So thank you all the participants who took time out from their busy schedule and joined this webinar. I must express sincere thanks to the entire INFA Managing Committee, INFA members and the subcommittee members for providing this wonderful support for organization of this webinar. So it's all teamwork and great collaboration with all the team members for organization of this webinar. On the logistic thing, we'll have a chance to look at the recordings of this session, and we'll be uploading it on our channels, and you can find it laterwards. And more so, our speakers will also like to share the presentation, so we'll also upload it on INFA website. So with this note, I'd like to conclude and thank everybody for your precious time. Have a good day ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Makhija, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So nice of you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.